Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, former Mayor Stephen Reed was arrested on multiple charges, including corrupt organizations, misapplication of property of government, deceptive business practices, tampering with records, securing execution of documents by deception, theft by failure to make required disposition, theft by deception, theft by receiving stolen property, theft of services, bribery, and dealing in unlawful proceeds and unlawful activities. He was arrested for his role as the mastermind in a pattern of corruption that spanned approximately 20 years. This scheme of serial issuance of public debt sent the city of Harrisburg, our Commonwealth's capital, into massive debt that sent this city into receivership and forced the sale of its assets. The Reed model, as it became known, of the issuance of public debt for one purpose, such as retrofitting the incinerator or renovating schools, and then diverting at least some of those proceeds to a special projects fund, which the mayor allegedly used to buy things of his interest and to create a fund to pay fees to a close group of professionals who supported Reed's interest. This Reed model began with the intention of retrofitting the Harrisburg incinerator to transform waste to energy to meet EPA standards. The first issuance of public debt came in 1998 in the amount of close to $56 million to refinance the 1993 and 1997 borrowings used to purchase the incinerator from the city. In 2000, the Harrisburg Authority issued another $25.2 million worth of debt to restructure prior borrowing and to backfill the hole the 1998 bond issues created. Again in 2000, another $4.2 million of debt was issued and diverted to the city as a guarantee fee. This fee was created and sized to fill the city's budget deficit. The grand jury found this was one example of Reed's taking proceeds from one bond issue and using them for another purpose that he believed would benefit him. The debt issuance continued in 2002 with $17 million issued. In 2003, the Harrisburg Authority issued Series A, B, and C for a total amount of $76 million. By 2003, the incinerator was carrying almost $105 million worth of debt. I should note that the purchase price of the incinerator was $34.2 million. Another link in the chain of debt that wrapped around this city occurred with the 2003 issuance of Series D, E, and F, which encumbered the incinerator with a spectacular additional $125 million worth of debt. It was from this massive issuance that Reed picked fees to be spent on artifacts and curiosities. The total collection amassed under Reed's watch was roughly 10,000 items. In 2007, the Harrisburg Authority issued the 2007 C note for $20.9 million and a D note for $9 million, certifying all of the previous debt as self-liquidating, despite projections from 3 of 4 firms that indicated otherwise, and the obvious financial problems of the incinerator. This chain of debt grew larger, wrapped itself around the city. Harrisburg still drags this debt behind it today. The chains of the past continue to affect the future. The grand jury alleges that it was not only the incinerator that was harmed, but a number of civic organizations, such as the Harrisburg School District, the Harrisburg Civic Baseball Club, Harrisburg University of Science and Technology, and the Harrisburg Parking Authority. Each was exploited to raise capital, ostensibly necessary for a legitimate purpose, and each damaged by the crushing weight of the debt incurred in its name, and fees being diverted for purposes other than the renovations of school, for example. This diversion was actively hidden from investors and the city of Harrisburg. Transparency and competition for city business were subverted in favor of patronage and beclouding. The grand jury found that Reed offered things of value to officials in exchange for their discharge of duties related to the issuance of debt. Reed retained possession of a massive collection of city property and began to treat the city's assets as his own. This chain of debt took many years, approximately 20 years, to construct and almost 2 years to uncover. This arrest is only one part of an ongoing investigation into allegations of misconduct by others. I would like to commend the agents and the prosecutors from the Criminal Prosecution Section of the Office of Attorney General for their very time-consuming and diligent investigation, as well as the inventory of artifacts that took weeks alone to process. I would also like to thank District Attorney Ed Marsico and his office for their work prior to giving this case over to the Office of Attorney General and their cooperation in bringing this part of the city's dark history to light. As I said, this is an ongoing investigation. I'm hoping that this is a part of the city's past that will remain in the past. We're hoping that by uncovering this investigation and these wrongdoings and by holding people accountable to the citizens that they serve, this serves as an example to all. City funds are not to be used for personal property. This is not a game that crushes the city, our nation, our Commonwealth's capital, into a debt so massive that they're digging themselves out of for many, many years to come. Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, I will be happy to answer questions. I also have Deputy Attorney Generals who have prosecuted and will continue to prosecute the case, as well as the case agents behind us. You should all have a press packet that will outline all of the artifacts that we've inventoried so far. So far, we have about 10% of the 10,000 artifacts. I'm sure that they're showing up on your monitors on the side, and you also have a copy of the presentment, which details in great detail and well written by Deputy Attorney General Madden as to the complete uncovering of the scheme. Thank you.
General, is it clear to you at this point that there will be additional rounds of charges filed?
I can tell you that I feel very confident that there will be more charges filed. You know, as I said, former Mayor Reed was the mastermind, but he was assisted by others. Our investigation is ongoing, and we will continue to look for criminal activity rather than just pure negligence.
How high does this go up? The scope of this investigation? I mean, this involves state officials as well?
At this point, I can't comment on who or what it involves. I can tell you that we have looked at the entire case. We will continue with the next grand jury, bringing in witnesses and figuring out everyone who had a part to play in this, whether it was with regard to the self-liquidating debt certification, that the debt was self-liquidating when it really was not, or anybody who played a part in offering their vote on the issuance of debt in exchange for other favors or other things of value.
You work with federal investigators?
No, we're not.
Mr. Reed and his attorney this morning say that some of these charges are politically motivated. What would you say to that?
I don't even know what party Mr. Reed is from, so that would not be politically motivated. What these charges are about is about accountability. You know, we're here to serve the public, and the public needs to be served, not own self-serving interests. This is about accountability. This is about not playing games with public debt and public issuances. This is about making sure that when you issue public debt on behalf of the Harrisburg School District, the school district gets all of that money and the renovations are actually made. You know, this is taking money out of the hands of children, and that is not right. And when we are in a position of service, then it's about accountability to the citizens, nothing more than that.
General Kane,
Let's go in order, if you don't mind, so I don't feel like I'm playing favorites.
How many other people do you think may be charged in the future? Is it in the dozens? Do you have an estimate?
I can tell you that this investigation, it took so long because it just kept going from one person to the next and from one entity to another entity. And I can tell you that there are more people involved, there is no doubt. And we're still continuing that investigation, as I said, to make sure that their conduct would be deemed as criminal rather than just pure negligence.
How soon may those charges come down?
It's still under the investigation stage, so I'm not really sure. Brad?
General Kane, you just said that the charges here were not politically motivated, yet you claim the charges, the recommended charges against you by a statewide grand jury were politically motivated and driven by other outside factors. Do you expect to be criminally charged by DA Furman, and if so, will you resign?
I think that's up to DA Furman. You know, it is in her hands. We're cooperating with her office. The timetable is up to her, so I can't speak on her behalf or on behalf of the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office. And I'll tell you what I will do. For the past 13 months, I have been carrying on. I will handle it, and I will continue to do my job.
You will not resign?
No, sir.
Can you articulate,
Let's go this route.
can you articulate how the delay in handing over this investigation to your office limited the scope of it, or what charges you were able to pursue?
I'm not sure what the delay was, if there was any, with the Dauphin County District Attorney's Office. I know that they conducted an investigation of their own that was quite extensive and also aided our investigation tremendously. When they handed it over to us, we immediately started working on it. It's the complexity and the scope of dealing with municipal bond issues, uncovering the paperwork, talking to all of the people involved, and getting people to cooperate with us and give us the truth is probably what it was more time consuming than any violent crime case would take.
General Kane?
You listed, said in your statement that this is one of the most disturbing cases of public corruption that the office has investigated. You went on to list a few instances in the statement. I was wondering if there was anything in particular that really stood out to you more than any other that was more disturbing than other cases in this statement.
I think what was most disturbing about this case to me that it went unchecked for 20 years. You know, at the Office of Attorney General, we're the watchdog over government, and this case went unchecked for so long. There was no real watchdog. There was no one who stood up and said the reissuance of these bonds when the incinerator is not, it cannot handle anymore, and to reissue bonds in the amount of over $200 million on a $32 million purchase price it's not just negligent, it becomes criminal after a while. And no one stood up for the city, no one stood up for the citizens of the city. And because of the scope of what occurred, and it occurred in plain sight, it's very disturbing to me. It's also disturbing that Mayor Reed served as mayor for 28 years. And he did do a lot of good for this city, but at some point that turned, and that's disturbing.
Up to say something.
Any member who was involved, who saw what was happening, who saw that the incinerator could not keep handling this debt, who saw that the debt incurred in the name of the Harrisburg School District was not proper, that the fees being paid back into the Harrisburg Authority by the school district were not proper. There were any number of people who could have stood up and brought this to light, and it wasn't.
Charged with having some criminal dealings with Captain Richard Pickles. Can you elaborate a little bit about what that was all about?
That I'll have to ask Deputy Madden to step in.
Certainly. Good morning. Without discussing anything which is ongoing, then Mayor Reed would direct then Captain Pickles, who was a member of the Harrisburg Bureau of Police, to travel around the country to locations where Reed had purchased artifacts and had them ready to pick up. So literally the captain would collect his salary as a Harrisburg police officer to go to Key West, to go to the All-Star baseball game in Portland, Maine, to go on trips which then Mayor Reed was not even able to confine to their nominal purpose of picking up artifacts and returning them to the city of Harrisburg, but would metastasize into outright vacations. For which then Captain Pickles was paid. And when he returned, he would submit for vacation leave, and the mayor would direct that be changed to administrative leave with pay. So we allege that is both theft of services, and in the instance where he directs that the record be changed, it's tampering with public records.
Exploiting to raise capital for the baseball club. Can you elaborate on that one as well?
Sure. Well, I think the time will come to lay this out in more detail, but the simple answer to your question is, I think what the mayor wanted to argue was that, well, for example, he might build a National Sports Hall of Fame museum on City Island, and the Senators also play on City Island. So if the museum that he theorized was ever built, well, the imaginary patrons of that museum might go to a Senators game. This, in his view, made it appropriate to take bond money, which belonged to the city, the people of Harrisburg, and which were sold, bonds which were sold to support the Harrisburg Senators and the stadium in which they play, and simply give it to associates of Mr. Reed or spend it on artifacts, none of which were related to city business or even to the business of the Harrisburg Senators. So that's one. The Harrisburg Civic Baseball Club, as the general noted, is an enterprise, is a city organization, which is part of this model of figuring out, coming up with a project, a civic project, a museum, or what have you, and then you sell bonds for an unrelated civic project and divert money either to buy artifacts or simply to pay your friends.
Could you go back over in a little more detail the 10,000 items? You said, if I understood you correctly, there were 10,000 and you have 1,000 of them. What are they? Are they items that you're contending that he acquired illegally? Are they items that he took and did something with? And then finally, if I'm right about that, where are the other 9,000?
So I can answer the question as to what he did with the items. When we executed a search warrant on his office and his home, we found it was virtually a warehouse filled with these items, and Deputy Madden was there, so I'll let him explain in more detail. He actually saw them, what they were, and we also have an inventory of what they were as well as on the monitors. But we allege that he diverted them for his own purposes because they never went into this museum that he had dreamed up. They were in his home, they were in his office. He used them for his own personal gratification. His home was literally cluttered with all of these items. And in the meantime, between the execution of the search warrant on his office and the execution of the search warrant on his home, he took a lot of these items down to Gettysburg to try and put them on consignment. We did recover those items. I believe they were firearms, maybe antique firearms. But that is how he diverted city assets. They belong to the city because they were bought with the proceeds in this special fund where the money was diverted from the sale of the bonds. But I'll let Deputy Madden describe in more detail what they were.
Thank you, Joe. I think, to answer your question, the assortment of things that we encountered in the mayor's private office and storage facility and in his home were staggering. This was a treasure house of items of every possible description, and some which beggar description. You've seen an assortment of them here, but I think that the ones on display include a life-size sarcophagus, the suit of armor you see here, for which the city paid perhaps $14,000, a $6,500 vampire hunting kit, which contains the predictable mallet and stake, headdresses, militaria, uniforms, weaponry, and as the general said, it's our contention that after Mayor Reed learned of this investigation, he went down to Gettysburg to try and sell off some of the stolen guns which he had collected. So I think that's the view of the array of stuff. To answer your question directly, what we allege happened is that there came a time when the mayor was no longer able simply to take money out of the general fund to buy these objects. It was unsustainable, it was politically untenable. And so what he began to do was take money from other municipal entities like the Harrisburg Authority, and he would simply disguise those transfers as an administrative fee. So for example, in the school district bond offering that the general mentioned, the authority, if you look at the closing costs for that bond deal, what you'll see is a $515,000 administrative fee payable to the Harrisburg Authority. And that went right out the door on artifacts. That's money that was part of funds. Investors bought bonds, Harrisburg School District bonds, and that money went out the door on things like wagon wheels and Wyatt Earp's cane.
The 10,000, am I right about that? You recovered 1,000?
Well,
fit this description from his house and his office, but there are 9,000 missing?
No, we have charged the percentage of the universe of items which the general mentioned, and there are others which at this moment we haven't charged, but that doesn't mean that we can't.
So you have 10,000.
I would say approximately yes.
And they're all from him, and they're all related to what you consider illegal activity?
Yeah, that's the universe of items that we discovered.
And I also wanted to know, just on that administrative fee from the Harrisburg School Board, there were witnesses who presented testimony before the grand jury that there is absolutely no documentation, and comparatively speaking to other administrative fees on the issuance of bonds, there's absolutely no documentation that there was any administration or work done that would total over $500,000 in fees.
What are the sentencing guidelines tied to the crimes he's charged today? Like, what's the maximum or what's the minimum he can face if
Obviously, they're all different. Some of them may merge in the event of a trial or a guilty plea. A lot of them are felonies. Some of them, the thefts depend upon the amount that's involved. So there's all different ranges and all different mergers, and it would also depend upon the prior record score, which obviously in this case would be a 0 for the mayor.
In that same line, there's been a lot of talk about statute of limitations. Is your office confident that you can get a conviction given the time frame of when these crimes occurred?
We are confident. Obviously, the first thing we ever look at is jurisdiction and statute of limitations. We're confident that what we've charged, obviously, is within the statute of limitations, and you also have to remember that there's an additional extension of a statute of limitations when it comes to fraud and also by public employees.
Is this partly a RICO case? Is this possibly looking at that?
Well, it is a corrupt organizations, which is the state's version of RICO. Let's go to the back. Is anybody else in the back?
Does the grand jury make any recommendations for legislation at all or new laws to try to deter this?
We have not made any recommendations, but I have seen the legislation that has been introduced, and obviously a lot of it is aimed at the problems to deal with the Harrisburg incinerator case. I support the legislation because we do need tools in our tool bag to be able to combat cases such as this and to be able to, as I said, to be able to pick them up a lot clearer. We need more oversight. We need watchdogs before this happens and before it gets out of control to the point where the citizens of Harrisburg are faced with this massive crushing debt.
Going back to somebody else's question here, I mean, this sounds like a real spectacular breakdown of the normal processes through which, you know, there's usually accountability in government. So I'm wondering if you are alleging here today that there was a conspiracy really to enable Reed to do all of these things for years and years and years without, you know, any penalty. And just as an aside, if you all behind the general can also identify yourselves, that would be very helpful.
So just with regard to whether there was a conspiracy, corrupt organizations does involve more than one person. How this happened was there was testimony before the grand jury that Reed was very gregarious, very charming. He had a very dynamic personality. And that's probably what started this out. There was testimony that he ruled with an iron thumb. So whether it was charm, whether it was ruling with an iron thumb, whether it was people getting things in exchange for their votes on issuing debt, all of those may have come into play. What our job is to separate the charm and the ruling with an iron thumb into the criminal activity, which we believe we've done with Reed so far. But there were absolutely, he was not alone. He could not have acted alone in this. And you want to identify yourselves?
Sure. My name is Rebecca Franz, F-R-A-N-Z. I'm a Deputy Attorney General.
Clark Madden, Deputy Attorney General. Would you like the agents general to identify themselves?
Inspector Craig LeCadre, L-E-C-A-D-R-E.
Agent Robert Drawbaugh, D-R-A-W-B-A-U-G-H.
Thomas Gote, G-O-T-E.
Have you granted immunity to any of the witnesses?
We can't tell you that right now. That's a part of the ongoing investigation, and if I'm sure that they will be testifying in the future.
And there were 2 days of testimony before a Senate panel where many of the witnesses that we're seeing now testified. Do you believe that any of those witnesses committed perjury?
We don't have any evidence of that right now, but again, the investigation is ongoing.
Reed said himself that he has stage 4 cancer. Is there any, I guess, looking to fast track this trial given his health at this time?
It's going to have to go through the regular legal process. I think that will be up to his attorneys as to what, the motions that they file. We're constrained by court calendars, we're constrained by the defense motions, and we're also constrained by the caseload. But we have an obligation as the Commonwealth to bring the case to trial within 365 days, and we will push it as quickly as possible for justice, whether it's for Mayor Reed or for the citizens of Harrisburg.
General, the mayor can't just issue a bond debt on his own, so do your investigation uncover any wrongdoing by any banks, by any bond firms, by any credit rating agencies, anybody, and is there any chance that taxpayers can recoup any of that money? Because they would be part of the watchdog.
You are correct. He could not have done this on his own. And again, the investigation is ongoing into anyone who had their hand in this chain of debt that wraps around the city. Anybody who is found to have any criminal liability, we will charge them as appropriate.
That includes any bankers, any lawyers, any credit rating agencies, et cetera.
Wherever this investigation goes, it goes. Yes.
Again, this is a kind of a broad question, and maybe it's better for Mr. Madden, but Reed was mayor a long time, and a certain amount of, I'm sure, creative financing or bending the rules happens in every administration. I'm wondering if what you've looked at, was there a turning point? Was there a point where you kind of went past the point of no return beyond the bounds of reasonable amounts of creative work as a
There was no doubt that Mayor Reed thought outside of the box, which probably, made him attractive to voters and which probably assisted him in doing some of the good that he did for the city. But you are correct. There was a certain point in time when thinking outside of the box became criminal activity, and I'll let Deputy Madden answer if he can pinpoint a certain time when that did happen.
I think absolutely, General, that there is I think that when it became politically untenable to take money directly out of the general fund, when the city sort of turned off the tap, that was a moment where I think, and who am I to say? It's not for us to judge these things in hindsight, and I'm not trying to gainsay decisions that were made in the past. But that seems to me to be an opportunity for folks to have said, okay. And rather, what they did was just as you put it, creatively then begin to take those same amounts of money under the guise of fees charged in bond transactions into which the city entered, or by other means to sort of circumvent what would be the normal requirement of competitive bidding or transparency in those kinds of municipal transactions. So I think that's right.
And diverting these fees into a special project fund too. I mean, that was creative thinking, and that special project fund was used to pay for the mayor's own interest and the artifacts that we found in his house and office, and that were allegedly to go for a museum that was never built.
That just began in '91, so would you say about that time?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The first of the big municipal debt transactions, and the incinerator, of course, becomes an opportunity to float really enormous bond issues, which provide funds for these efforts.
And just to follow on that, wherein lies the crime? What is the crime in using that kind of money?
Well, if I may, General,
Sure,
I think that what I feel very strongly about is the to call money which you plan to spend on a vampire hunting kit or an assortment of Old West rifles or what purports to be the floor from the bar where Morgan Earp was killed, or an Indian headdress, or a Stetson hat in a box manufactured in perhaps 1982, or a host of other items, many of which were fakes, despite the fact that the people of the city of Harrisburg paid the authentic price, paid top tick. One person in the grand jury testified that when Mayor Reed came to town, the fakes came out and the prices went up. And for the mayor to divert money from the school district, from the students of the Harrisburg School District, from a municipal authority whose proper original charge was sewer and water. I don't know how many of you here in the Capitol Press Corps travel along Front Street, but you'll notice that they're in the process of replacing the 19th century system of pipes which underlies our city. And as opposed to spending the money on cops and pipes that work that don't need to be refitted in 2015, they were spent on this menagerie of collectibles and curiosities, and that is a fraud on investors. That is a fraud on the marketplace, right?
And it was this deception of issuing the bonds and then taking these fees and using them for a purpose that the bond was not issued for. So it's not only deception upon the investors and the people of Harrisburg, it's also, it's like a financial scheme. It's taking from one to give to another, and that other just happened to be Mayor Reed and his interests.
So altogether, how much public money are we talking about that Reed used for himself?
Millions of dollars. I think conservatively, the collection, just the collection of artifacts, and that doesn't capture the universe of things which are at issue in this criminal case, but if we confine ourselves to what's the value of the charged items which we allege were stolen, millions of dollars.
And it's also the cost to the people of Harrisburg. I mean, they're now repaying this debt. They had to sell off city assets. They're in receivership. The cost to the people of Harrisburg far outweighs the couple of million that even went to into the mayor's interests.
In terms of those artifacts, I can't imagine that all of those purchases were particularly well documented with receipts. So has that affected your investigation into them and where you could charge him?
Certainly, I think that the record keeping was generally pretty abysmal, and I have to take the opportunity, as the general did, to recognize and thank our excellent investigators who have just worked tirelessly. As you can imagine, a warehouse of 10,000 items, they weren't all in one place. It's a job to go through them and catalog and inventory them. So to answer your question directly, what we have done is confine ourselves to those items where there is documentation. And where we are most confident about the provenance, so to speak, of the item that we've charged and what the city paid for it. So the general answer is yes, appalling record keeping. The particular answer is we've confined ourselves in the charging document to those items about which we're confident.
So what percentage is that of all those artifacts?
Well, I think about 10% is the general sense.
10%, yeah.
General, haven't seen the presentment yet, so maybe this will be self-evident, but can you folks speak with any more specificity to the nature of the bribes that you are alleging that Reed paid to other elected officials?
Without offering any names, I can tell you that when the reissuance of debt came up in, I believe, 2007,
And in 2000 itself?
2000 and 2007, there were now questions being asked, and there were conditions. The mayor then went to the city and the county to almost back him on the reissuance of the debt. The city and the county were putting certain conditions on their backing, and about 15 conditions. When the mayor disagreed with some of them, then he took it upon himself to offer certain things of value to members of either those councils, either the city or the county, to sway their vote in favor of issuing the debt. Angela?
Say what those things of value were?
Yeah, it is in the presentment, so if it's laid out pretty clearly there. Angela?
Your personal attorney recently met with Risa Furman's office within the last few weeks. I'm wondering during that meeting, which is usually kind of one of the last things that happens before, some sort of formal charge or no formal charges happen. Did she give your attorney some sort of sense of her timeline and whether she's wrapping up the case? Do you?
Again,
Have you been told?
I have not been told that, and in fact, I hear the rumors around Harrisburg, and I sometimes think the rumor mill is akin to middle school sometimes, but no, we haven't heard anything like that. We were there to, I wasn't there, but they were there to cooperate. I am very forthcoming with what happened and what didn't happen, and they were there to make sure that we offer any piece of evidence or any bit of information that we can, and so that she can make her decision as she sees fit.
Attorney General, good morning. We need to start winding this down. How about the last couple of questions, Dave?
The bond money that was taken out for the incinerator upgrades, I assume some of that was spent on incinerator upgrades. Do you have like a percentage that actually went for that?
There was money spent on incinerator upgrades. That is correct. When the EPA tightened their standards, they had, I believe, there was approximately a $25 million price tag to that. So there were some retrofittings that were made. The company that had previously done the retrofittings no longer was doing them, which is part of our allegation that Mayor Reed kept those who stayed in line with his interests closely. That company was fired, and another company was brought in that no one ever heard of. So that was all part of it. As to the amount of the dollar amount of the retrofitting that actually occurred, I do not know. Do you have that?
I'm going to respectfully defer the answer on that out of deference to the ongoing investigation.
Okay, did you sign off on the Hubert Lester Michael petition, and do you support it? Do you support the language in it? And have you reached out at all to the administration about it, and what have you said to them?
So you have 5 questions there, Mark. I'm going to go with the first one, if I can remember them in order. Yes, of course. We talked about this in approximately March, decided what our course of action would be in the event that Michael was granted a reprieve by the governor. At that point, the Terrence William case had already been filed by the DA of Philadelphia County, and there was not much more that we could add to it at that point. We made the decision that we would have standing in the event that Herbert Michael, which is our case, ever came up, an issue came up with it. I believe that Michael was granted his reprieve on June 3rd, and on July 2nd, on or about July 2nd, we filed our petition with the Supreme Court. With regard to the language, I didn't see the final draft. I saw the one right before that. A little bit strong, but we're dealing with people's lives here. We're dealing with an issue that's very emotionally charged on one side or the other. It's been an issue that's been debated and studied back and forth for, as long as I've been a prosecutor and been paying attention to this, which is, decades. So am I disappointed? No, I'm not disappointed. I do support the petition. I think question number 4 was, did I talk to the administration? I did after we filed it. And what was said is really just between us. It was really just formalities of, we probably didn't give you the heads up before it was filed, but it's filed. They were fine with it. It was probably a 5-minute conversation with the chief of staff.
Sure. General, it seems like from the statements of Mayor Reed and Mr. Hockheimer, his attorney today, that they alluded to, I'm just reading from one of the statements, they said, we will fight the nature and timing of these charges, which may be inspired more by political agendas than by a search for justice. It's easy to get an implication from that they may be saying that, look, the Attorney General's office is in a world of trouble with the clouds that are surrounding you, with his firm at the moment and so forth. And I would just like to ask you, are you worried at all that stuff could sort of be like an albatross on the people that are trying to prosecute this case?
No, I'm actually not worried. I believe that that's probably, maybe that's what they do believe. And I disagree with your characterization that the Attorney General's office is in a world of trouble. We've been really doing our jobs. I read that this is it's a distraction, it's this and it's that. I handle what's going on in Montgomery County over here, and I go to work over here. And, I think what the actions of our office over the past 2.5 years, even over the past couple of weeks, have proven that. We filed a lawsuit against nursing home companies because there was negligent care of those entrusted to them. We filed a lawsuit on the moratorium on the death penalty. Our child abuse, our child predator arrests are up almost 800%. Our drug arrests are up 30%. We have the first national model in the Mobile Street Crimes Unit, which is now on its 3rd deployment. We've sued a company because they didn't use American-made steel. We're continuing to fight on behalf of patients out in Western Pennsylvania and the ongoing battle between UPMC and Highmark. So we're doing our jobs. We're handling it well. And I don't think that there's any distraction on our part. Whose political agenda it would further, I have no idea who they mean, but they're entitled to put forward a defense.
Would you credit to bringing this information to your knowledge?
Sure.
Just with respect to this case particularly, Charlie, because I think it's a fair question, there is nothing political about this, or the suit of armor, or the knives, or the headdress. These are not generalized charges which are open to one particular political philosophy or another. These are rooms full of curiosities and collectibles bought with the money of the city, the people of the city of Harrisburg, and that's pretty hard to characterize as political.
And the crushing evidence of the debt is also, so. Chuck's in charge here.
Been well documented in the media as well as some hearings for many, many years. So what took law enforcement so long to get to this point?
I think the complexity of it, getting witnesses to come forward and to tell us exactly what happened at those board meetings, tell us what the conversations were with the mayor, tell us what happened at the city council meetings, and just the mere complexity of the financial transactions. They take a long time. It's time consuming. It takes a lot of expertise to do what our agents did. I know that District Attorney Marsico also had, he had a lot of work into this as well. So I know it seems like 2 years should be a long time, but it took 20 years to build this corrupt organization. It took 20 years to wrap these chains around this city, and it took 2 years to bring it all to light. And we're happy that maybe, you know, justice may be a little bit slower than it should have been, but this has been going on since 1990. So we feel confident that we did it in the amount of time that needed to be taken so that we can fully flesh out the facts, document it as it needed to be documented, and not just rush to judgment.
Just real quick, with whom would you credit, other than DA Marsico, with bringing this information to you?
You know, I think the present mayor, Mayor Papenfuse, had a lot to do with this because he was an advocate for the people of the city, and he just, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, I guess, sometimes, and he just wouldn't let it go. And I think it's unfortunate that sometimes that's what needs to happen to bring it to light and to get someone to actually do something about it. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.